One wet Friday in June 1987, a family in Napier lost their daughter. The abduction, rape and murder of Teresa Cormack shook the country. For police hunting her killer, it was the beginning of an inquiry that would take them more than 14 years to complete. Finally, the story can be told of how one man's promise to a murdered 6-year-old girl led to the capture and imprisonment of one of New Zealand's most horrendous criminals. Tonight, we go inside Operation Cormack.
Tonight, hundreds of volunteers search for missing Napier schoolgirl. Good evening.
Network News for Sunday, the 21st of June.
Hundreds of volunteers today joined police in searching for missing Napier schoolgirl, 6-year-old Teresa Cormack. Teresa went missing on Friday, one day after her birthday, and police fear that she's been abducted.
As a police officer stationed in the neighbouring district of Hastings, Detective Sergeant Brian Shabb was called in to join the search for the little schoolgirl. He could not have guessed that these were to be his first days on an operation that would consume the majority of his police career.
In those days, for a 6-year-old girl to be snatched off the street and taken away, you know, it was unheard of, really.
In the faces of Kelly Piggott and Ross Cormack, New Zealanders saw the tragedy of parents desperately hoping for a young daughter's safe return.
There's obviously talk that someone's taken her. If that's happened, what would you say to that person?
Just let her come home. We need her home.
And what if she's out there, perhaps watching this?
Just we love her. We love her so much.
Teresa had been missing for 3 days, and although there had been no reported sightings of her, police still believed she would be found alive.
When she hadn't been found by Sunday, it got a lot more intensive even then, although we were still looking just for a lost little girl because there was nothing to suggest anything untoward had happened to her.
After nearly a week of fruitless searching, their optimism evaporated.
You know, we were starting to think that we were probably looking for a dead body as opposed to a lost little girl, and even sort of the middle of that week. Of course, that wasn't confirmed really until we found the body on the Saturday.
A big team of police was on the beach at Whiraniki, north of Napier, by 9 this morning, after the body was found by a woman out walking her dog about 8:30. It was lying face down on the shingle near a tree at the top of the beach, where it's thought to have been dumped from the road.
Brian Shabb was assigned as officer in charge of Teresa's body at the beach. Witnessing for himself the awful tragedy of her death inspired him to make a promise to the little girl.
You know, just looking at her and realising where we were and what had happened, you know, I think probably everyone was on the beach that day. You could just feel the resolve that, you know, we'd get this guy one day. I mean, no one deserved to die like that, certainly not a lovely little 6-year-old girl. And, you know, even though you might be a hardened old policeman, you know, there's certain things that still can affect you. And, you know, I promised myself for Teresa's sake that, you know, we'd just keep going until we found this guy. And, you know, I never really felt that we never would.
Detective Sergeant Shabb's confidence in finding the murderer was in part based on the enormous flood of information police received from the public. Sightings of a small girl in a red raincoat on the streets of Napier confirmed that Teresa had walked the half-kilometre from her house to school between 8:30 and 9 that Friday morning. Police believed she had most likely been abducted soon after the school bell rang at 9. Nominations of suspects came pouring in from the public, and police began looking at each one in turn to see if they could establish an alibi for the period before 10 o'clock on the morning of Teresa's disappearance.
As we went through, several of them, for various reasons, you know, looked quite promising in the early stages in that they couldn't account for where they were, or we had quite reliable information that somehow they were involved.
Ross, Kelly, and baby Sarah Jane, we are gathered here today as a grieving family because of the actions of a person or persons at this time unknown.
As the country joined with Teresa's parents in mourning the loss of an innocent young life, police immersed themselves in finding the person responsible for such an appalling act.
We were just going around anyone that was nominated as a suspect, chasing them up and interviewing them, attempting to alibi them if we could, and either eliminating them or putting them in.
I think it's actually been eliminated, yeah.
Many of the suspects police investigated were known sex offenders.
You know, various suspects started to look good, and of course the team would focus more on that aspect of the inquiry. But as it panned out, each one of those suspects was eliminated as far as they could be at the time, and you moved on to the next one.
The problem police faced in pinpointing the offender was a lack of physical evidence. Teresa's body had lain exposed on the beach for over a week. During that time, seas whipped up by a storm had washed over her and stripped away possible forensic clues. But pathologists who examined her did manage to recover crucial evidence. As well as discovering a partially digested lolly in her stomach, vaginal swabs were found to contain traces of semen. 3 pubic hairs were also found in Teresa's mouth and underwear. Solving the murder was going to depend on identifying whose semen and pubic hairs they were.
Well, in '87, there were the earliest DNA profiling analyses carrying on, but you needed a large sample size to be able to get a result.
The semen and pubic hairs recovered from Teresa's body were far smaller crime scene samples than ESR could successfully process in '87. To establish whether or not the semen sample could reveal the genetic fingerprint of the offender, it would need to travel to England for testing.
This is a destructive process. All the DNA that was recovered was used during that analysis. It was put onto a gel and run, and there was insufficient to get a result.
The cotton wool swabs containing the murderer's semen had been destroyed without yielding his identity. The police's most vital clue was now gone. But before the swabs were sent overseas, an important event had occurred. Fearing that the English tests would completely destroy the swabs, an ESR scientist sliced off a tiny portion of one swab and sealed it between 2 glass microscope slides. That minute sample of semen preserved between the slides was now the only real way of identifying the killer. But it would take science another 14 years to develop a test for such a minute sample. Teresa Cormack had been dead for 9 months. Police had been unable to find her killer, but somehow her parents never lost hope that one day they would.
My faith in the police was never actually shaken at all. I didn't see any cause to. It was a frustrating situation for us and for them, and never shaken.
It was one of those cases, and unfortunately that happens every now and then, that we just can't do any more. And you know, Ross and Kelly accepted that. They knew the effort that had been put into it, but they also believed, as you know, we believe, that one day this will keep going and one day we'll catch this guy.
Operation Cormack had produced a list of 845 suspects, with 20 names singled out as top priority. Many had alibis covering the time frame that police believed the abduction had occurred in. What's more, DNA technology could not yet effectively prove whose pubic hair and semen had been found on Teresa's body. With no other lines of inquiry leading anywhere, the investigation was scaled down.
Well, it's the first time I thought about not catching the guy. I always assumed that it was going to happen. You know, when they said it was going to scale down, I thought, oh, well, maybe it's not going to happen.
A microscope slide was now the only hope Kelly and Ross had of finding their daughter's killer.
But we had to wait. So we waited.
And it was the only chance Brian Shabb had of ever delivering on his promise to Teresa.
What? What do you mean a profile?
He'd have to wait 14 years for that.
Bullshit.
Though police had to wait for DNA testing to develop, the file on the Cormack murder was never closed. Brian Shabb became officer in charge of the investigation in 1993.
New information was coming in all the time, and I suppose on average I'd get a couple of bits of information each month, but an awful lot of it was clairvoyants ringing up and trying to solve the thing for us.
The police needed more robust evidence than clairvoyance to catch a killer, but they kept drawing a blank. However, Brian's commitment to the case fueled Kelly and Ross's belief that their daughter's murderer would one day be caught.
You've got a lot of strength, and that's what gives you confidence in him. Inner strength and physical strength. So you wouldn't want Brian on your tail.
I mean, I used to walk through town often and just see people, and I was always wondering, is he the killer? Is that the person who took Teresa away? And if it is, how the hell am I ever going to prove it?
The Cormack case was always on Brian's mind. He often checked over the files, searching for missed clues. The sheer volume of paperwork contained in over 200 folders was daunting.
Stuff right through here is all just information on vehicles, suspects, identikits, area canvas, and it's just, as you can see, just a mountain of information in there.
For the people who were faced with this inquiry 14 odd years ago, they did an incredible job actually of working through all the information and managing it and getting into a good logical sequence.
The thoroughness of the original investigation gave Brian confidence that his offender was in there somewhere. But a clear picture of the circumstances and time frame of Teresa's abduction on that morning in June '87 meant that many of the prime suspects had alibis in their defence. Brian needed proof on one of them, and that proof lay with the science of DNA.
One of the things that Brian has done, certainly over the last 7 or 8 years, is every time there's been an advance of science, he's been there knocking at the door saying, what about the Cormack case? And then ultimately he got the answer that he'd always prayed that he'd get.
The offender's semen recovered from Teresa Cormack's body had been archived in secure storage for 14 years. The progress of science had been steady over that time, and by 2001, ESR scientists made the decision to retest the Cormack slide. Sue Petricevic ran the tests and got a result.
I think really the moment of getting that DNA profile was just fabulous. I mean, that was the moment when suddenly it seemed possible that there's a piece of evidence that's actually going to help. It's actually going to start a whole new line of investigation, and there's something concrete.
A colleague of Sue rang Brian with the news he'd always waited for.
CIB Shabb. Now that was really exciting. That was great news, because that was something we'd been waiting for so long. What? What do you mean a profile? Bullshit. Really? I was actually quite pleased. I was sitting in the office by myself because I put the phone down and didn't really know what to do, and took a little skip and a jump and a bit of a yahoo, and would have been highly embarrassed if anyone had been there watching me. So.
What Sue Petricevic and her ESR team had produced was a mathematical representation of the man who had taken a 6-year-old girl from her parents nearly a decade and a half ago.
We've got something solid now, so we're getting closer, Getting closer, love, and yeah, it was good. It was better than, oh shit, is it ever going to happen? Which is kind of what it was getting to.
With a major breakthrough of a DNA profile, Brian Shabb could once more gear up Operation Cormack to a full-scale investigation.
While we're going through the briefing, I'll just pass these around so everyone can work out why we're still here doing what we're doing. We had photographs of Teresa when she was found on the beach and lying on the slab in the mortuary, and horrible photos, but they were used in all the briefings I had with new staff, because they could see what he had done to Teresa, and everyone was just so resolved to help catch this killer. Okay, now our mission is to identify and locate the offender for the murder of Teresa Cormack. That's why we're all here. As you know, the media are onto it, that we've got a DNA profile. That's what we'll be telling them tomorrow that we have.
Going public with a huge new development was an important challenge for police, because someone in the community perhaps knew who the murderer was. Also, police were looking for new names to be put forward as suspects. This was essential because there was the distinct possibility that the police inquiry back in '87 had not put the actual offender on the suspect list.
And of course that was always something that, niggling in the back of your mind, well, where do we go if he is in the initial net that we cast, or the ones we subsequently pull in?
With the help of the Police Media Liaison Office, it was decided Detective Sergeant Shab would deliver the key messages in the publicity campaign.
The fact that, he's out there, we haven't stopped. We now got enough to convict you, and we're coming to get you.
That's your sort of real personal pull bit.
That's right. I've been working on this for 14 years. I don't think you're going to get away, it's because I'm a bit slow.
The Operation Cormack media plan required the highest possible public interest to be sustained over the longest possible time. Kelly and Ross went on homes to maximise the impact of this breakthrough in their daughter's murder investigation.
When did you find out there was a new development, Kelly?
Well, the police have been really good about keeping us informed of any developments along the way.
Hoping that the killer would give a noticeable reaction to somebody, Brian gave a very pointed and personal message to him.
Do you have a message for the person who may have done it?
You know that we know who you are now, and we're not going to stop. So we're coming to get you, so just be ready for us. Hopefully, this would just spook our offender, getting him to do something or perhaps say something to someone.
As events were soon to reveal, that strategy worked. Teresa's murderer did see the broadcast and did give a reaction to those he was living with. Sadly, no one told the police at the time.
We'd be absolutely watching that, I guarantee it.
But the home show was a huge success in prompting the public to report new information. Significantly, the 0800 for Teresa line ran hot with new suspect nominations.
The information we'll take. South Island were picked up by a sleazy person. Evening Operation Cormack can help you.
A huge amount of information comes in. It's unbelievable with the amount of information. We'd planned for it, prepared for it, and looked at what we thought was the worst case scenario, and we were stretched.
There's 7 on the waiting list at the moment. So, evening Operation Cormack can help you.
To help hunt down the offender from a growing list of suspects, Brian would enlist the help of police who specialise in catching notorious criminals.
Everything that he ever does is all about self-preservation.
Operation Cormack had a DNA profile from the semen found at the crime scene. Understanding that someday they would need to match that semen DNA with the offender's DNA, police had taken blood samples from 850 suspects during the early days of the inquiry.
In the first few weeks there was just real good suspects, obviously with hindsight. One real good suspect was blooded early on in the operation.
ESR began running the 1987 blood samples through tests looking for a match with the DNA profile retrieved from Teresa's body. At the same time, the publicity the case was receiving meant new suspects were being nominated by the public. Police had to get blood samples from these people too. Knowing their DNA would clear them, many of the suspects quickly volunteered a sample. Others needed to be tracked down.
Are you aware we've sort of expanded the inquiry a little bit, and we're required to get blood off people, and there's a person that's in your rest home that we would like to take blood from, or to come and see him. We're just being courteous to telephone you. He's 97 years old and he's in an old people's home.
The Operation Cormack suspect list had grown to now number over 900 names. To assist Napier Police in prioritising their investigations, the suspect profiling team arrived from Auckland. Their job, to try and establish the likely character of the murderer.
This crime is a white man's crime, and the hero, I understand, kind of indicates that as well. But what do you people,
research and everything tells you, and everything, all the other work I've done would suggest that he's a white man.
Everything that he ever does is all about self-preservation. This guy, he's going to, so he can survive with that problem that he's got. I would be very, very surprised if this guy would ever give himself up.
He was showing a lot of confidence in his ability to keep control of the girl, going right through town, didn't he? She could easily turn to shit him halfway through town and he'd be right there then, wouldn't he?
Because of A, the way he's picked up the kid without any fuss, got her in the car, the lolly in the stomach, got her to a place, and after the offence has then dealt with the body in an organised manner. That reeks of experience to me.
Even profiled as an experienced sex offender, Napier Police still had plenty of people who fit the description.
Only if we do all of Napier for sex offenders, we're only looking 509. If we do all sex offenders for Whiraniki, we're looking at 185.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're looking at quite manageable numbers.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That's carried away, yeah.
Brian Shabb was confident Operation Cormack had already interviewed, photographed and filed the man who had raped and murdered Teresa. Nevertheless, he needed a proven DNA link between the semen the killer had left on her body and the blood samples given to police. Sue Patricevic was testing 14-year-old blood samples, looking for that match.
Because we're humans, a lot of our DNA is similar. For example, we all have 2 arms, 2 legs, 2 eyes, the same basic functions. A lot of DNA controls those functions and processes. What we're interested in the forensic aspect is the regions where people differ. So we're looking for regions where people differ and where they differ as much as possible.
For forensic purposes, an individual's DNA is simplified.
In this system, a person's DNA is represented in 20 numbers.
845 old suspect blood samples were examined by ESR. It took nearly a year of meticulous work. Eventually, the results were in. 4 blood samples were of insufficient quality to produce a profile. Of the 841 that did generate DNA profiles, 840 did not match that from the stored semen sample, but 1 did.
I looked at the first 2 and they matched, and I looked at the next 2 and they matched, so I looked at the first 2 again and the next 2 again, and I went through the whole series and each one matched. And of course, as each number matches, it becomes more and more exciting because you realise that you're onto a correspondence here with an individual.
That individual was Jules Meekus. Brian Shabb finally had the name of Teresa Cormack's killer.
So I then, of course, had no information in my office at all to tell me who this guy was. He didn't mean anything to me off the top of my head, so I had to rush across to our headquarters building, which is over in Dalton House, get down into the basement there where the original file was still stored, and grab that copy.
Meekus had a history of sexual offending going back 11 years before Teresa's death. He had been one of the police's top suspects and had offered an alibi for early in the morning of her abduction. But ESR told Brian Shabb that it was 60 million times more likely to get the profile match if the DNA came from Jules Meekus than from any other man in New Zealand. Those were good enough odds for Brian, and there was one person he was particularly eager to tell of the match.
Knowing Kelly's circumstances, I wanted to have someone there to help the 2 of us get through what was going to be a real, emotional time, I suppose, especially for Kelly. And it was quite good because my wife came round with me and she met Kelly for the first time.
I had a gut feeling something big was happening, but I thought, was it a counsellor? What am I going to need counselling for? And my biggest fear was actually, is it someone I have known? Or because I thought there must have been something big happen. And when Brian arrived with his wife, that was wonderful. And the news, I just didn't know quite what to do. Sort of laugh or cry, or just sort of head in my hands, and then just looked at each other and grinned. And
Meekus was living near Wellington. Brian was itching to grab him.
I mean, that was really hard. I know when I took a couple of guys from here down with me to Lower Hutt, we got there on the Sunday and we just wanted to rush out there and lock him up.
I think a couple of times we looked at each other and said, well, should we go and do it now?
Brian knew he had to prepare fully for an arrest. With the scrutiny of a High Court trial expected sometime in the future, there was no room for procedural errors. But now he was only 2 days away from looking into the eyes of the man who killed Teresa Cormack.
The body was found, taken. There was one red button missing from her red pinafore she was wearing at the time. The ratio is 1 to 60 million.
2 days prior to taking Jules Meekus into custody, Detective Sergeant Brian Shabb travelled from Napier to Wellington. Helping him prepare for the arrest was Detective Keith Price. With one of New Zealand's highest ever profile investigations about to make an arrest in their neighbourhood, staff at Lower Hutt Police Station needed to be briefed on the operation that had just walked into their office.
The guy's name is Jules Pierre Nicholas Mikus. Surname Mikus. He currently resides here in Nainai. So he's the boy. We don't want the media to know of this development between now and tomorrow.
Teresa Maida, M-A-I-D-A, Cormack.
Application for the warrants that would bring Meekus in was carefully prepared, while additional police resources were readied.
I couldn't see any problems with the address. There was no dogs, so it's a fairly open sort of section from the street.
Covert surveillance guaranteed that Meekus would be home when police called the following day.
He's got long hair, he's with his missus and a young baby.
Yeah, that's him.
In his car, and he's there, and they're just sitting there watching him, waiting for us.
Here we go, here we go.
Now the second part is I've been here, I've got him.
Oh yeah. Just put him through the cells. Yeah.
He wants to talk to Bill.
He's coughed.
Oh good work, Sponge.
Yeah, so they're watching him and they'll see him to bed tonight.
Well, I knew he was there and I knew he wouldn't be too far away, but...
Finally, with all the planning in place, the day had come to lock up the man who had taken an innocent 6-year-old girl's life.
Has anyone got a set of handcuffs?
Yep. It's worth a chest.
Okay. Yeah, in my desk.
The normally cool Brian Shabb is now noticeably apprehensive.
Luck, Shabby.
It's not luck anymore. Hey, yeah, did I say it last night when we were having a few beers? But thanks for coming. And I'm sure you'll do well.
We will. Sure day, Shabby.
No, it's
Our day.
It's finally Teresa's day.
Yeah, it's
and I'll just have to remind this boy off it at some stage.
It's sort of Jules' day a bit too.
Oh, it's Jules' big day.
Jules' big day.
Jewel will remember. Yeah.
Last day, yeah.
It's last day, yeah. Actually quite, yeah. It's going to be quite good, the first look in the eye. I mean, that's why you join the job, and you join the job to lock up the baddies, and you know, he was one of the worst baddies that you can ever imagine, and we were going out to lock him up for one of the worst crimes, so I mean, it was exciting. This is the day we've all waited for, and he's probably waited for it too, I'd say. It was a big moment, and it's probably I'll always remember, you know, that actual face-to-face contact. And he probably will too, I think, but for obviously different reasons. There was 2 ways that he could have reacted. You know, he could have just said, "Oh, thank God you're here, I've been expecting you, and come on in," or just completely deny everything and go about his business, you know, without any emotion at all. And that's what he did. And I mean, that's probably what deep down we thought he'd do because of the sort of guy he is.
We agreed to keep our camera hidden from Jules Meekus. Back at Lower Hutt Police Station, he was interviewed by Detectives Shabb and Price.
You want to get an admission for an evidential side of things, and you also want to get what happened for, I call the parents, victims, and you know, the extended family and friends. They're victims of this, and through admissions, you may be able to just help them come to grips with something.
I sort of try to get through to them saying, no, you can't be that cold-hearted person who's gone in there and just killed this beautiful young girl. I mean, you just tell me, you know, let me know you're not that person. I'm just trying to get through it. I don't know
wasn't me. I don't know what you're talking about.
So get the photos.
So this will be the time it happens. If it happens now, it'll happen. Otherwise, we're just fucking wasting our time, mate. So,
Mikas was refusing to assist police with an admission of guilt, so there was only one thing left for Brian Shabb to do.
I'll never forget it. He stood him up and basically put his hand on his shoulder and said, "I'm formally arresting you for the murder." And yeah, it was pretty, it was quite moving, really.
the thing with this case, everything is good, you know, it's exciting and it's good to have been there and that sort of thing, but always, you know, you just can't help thinking about why it's all come about, you know, and, you know, although, you know, everything would have been so much better, you know, I'd rather not have ever done any of that if he hadn't done what he did to Teresa.
Now under arrest, Mikas is taken downstairs for processing, where the line of questioning is somewhat softer.
You're not ill in any way?
You've got the flu or anything? You smell it?
Probably weight loss.
Right. Might be your fag too much, mate. You smoke too much, mate.
When we take a person into custody, we accept responsibility for their welfare, and those questions are intended to establish if there are any existing conditions or problems that that may manifest themselves in self-harm or harm to other people whilst they're in our custody.
Are you feeling in yourself withdrawn, irrational, depressed, overly ashamed, agitated or anxious about what you're here for in the police station today? You don't understand what they mean? No. Okay. Depressed, do you know what depressed means? When you're feeling sad? Depressed means very, very sad.
Where's he going?
He's going there, definitely.
15 years after kneeling beside the violated body of Teresa Cormack on a deserted beach, Brian Shabb locked up the man who had taken her life.
Yeah. Pick a sweet, mate.
In here, mate.
We want to get a psychiatric report under Criminal Justice Act. If they can do that while he's in custody.
Right.
That's all you want, eh?
Yeah, that's all I need.
We can't keep this guy in custody, there's something wrong.
Right. That's right, yes.
With their daughter's killer finally in custody, Kelly and Ross were about to endure the horror of seeing him in the flesh.
Even if the answers are hard to hear, I want to know what happened that day. I really do.
With Jules Mikas identified by his DNA as the murderer of Teresa Cormack, police started to prepare for his trial. Items of Teresa's clothing had been missing when her body was recovered at Whiraniki Beach. Police went to the Napier address where Mikas lived in 1987 and thoroughly searched it.
You know what we're looking for? We're looking for a button and piece of material, small items like that. So when I dug up, you go down yay deep to ensure that we've got that covered. That's what you do in this sort of a case. You cover every possible aspect, and although we knew probably that there'd be nothing there, we had to do it to confirm that.
Our top story, Teresa Cormack's accused killer goes to court in the city that was her home.
Police were out in force around the courthouse and security was high inside. But that didn't stop people venting their anger against Jules Mikas, accused of the abduction, rape and murder of the 6-year-old 15 years ago.
Kelly and Ross first saw their daughter's killer at the pre-trial hearing in Napier. The impact on them was devastating.
I felt sick.
I felt very angry.
It was definitely a tense, shaky moment.
After seeing him in court, you know, poor Ross was just still shaking and you could see that he was just fuming. And, you know, an obvious reaction too, because, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, for someone like that to do something to your daughter, you know, it was bad enough, but to have someone who looked like him and his face being the last one that, you know, she ever saw, you know, I think Ross found that very hard to deal with.
He does fit the mental picture. This sort of monster that you draw up in your head. He's suffered a bit over the last 15 years by the look of him.
I hope so.
Yeah. We certainly have.
We've got questions that only he can answer. Even if the answers are hard to hear, I want to know what happened that day. I really do.
With Mikas denying the murder, Kelly and Ross would never get those questions answered. Preparations for a High Court trial meant that Brian Shabb had to now hand over the completion of Operation Cormack to men outside the police.
Being the captain at the moment, I'd like to be able to score the winning try, but I can't do that. I've got to put my trust in the two big wingers we've got coming through, and hopefully they'll do the deed. I'm sure they will.
Obviously you want to make decisions in consultation with someone who's put so much of their life into that investigation, and that's what happened. But yeah, I think we always appreciated that at the end of the day there were certain calls which were going to have to be ours.
Place Jules Pierre and Marcus before the court. Jules Pierre Nicholas Marcus, you are charged on or about the 19th day of June 1987 at Napier. Did murder Teresa Maida Cormack. How do you plead guilty or not guilty?
I don't know how I would have handled a trial 14, 13 years ago, and the state I felt in at the time, and that numb sort of too close to anger state, that numbness that's on the edge of anger. Yeah, I think as it has turned out, I was in a position to be able to handle things better.
Do you swear by might have got the evidence you've given shall be truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Your Majesty. Get yourself going. Thanks. And that's the microphone there.
Okay.
There we are.
Yep.
I think your full name is Kelly Jane Piggott.
That's right.
And I think that you'll confirm for us all that you're the mother of Teresa Maida Cormack.
Yes.
Turning back to her birthday, the 18th of June, were there celebrations, presents and the like that day?
Yes, a quiet one with family and one friend.
Okay.
And yeah, definitely had a lovely little tea party and lots of presents.
Now, the next morning, did she express any view about wanting to go to school or not?
She did say she didn't want to go.
And to the best of your memory, what was your response when she said she didn't want to go to school?
That she was going.
In 1987,
The Crown prosecutors opened their case with witnesses who had seen Teresa the morning she was abducted.
what was it that caught your eye about the little girl that you saw?
Well, she was wearing a bright red raincoat, and she was just on her own, and I just wondered what on earth she was doing, why she wasn't at school at that hour of the morning.
What stands out is that she said she wanted to go back home, and I think I remember her saying something about playing with her birthday presents that she'd got at home.
Was the man you saw in front of you or behind you?
Behind me. He was walking down the footpath and then he crossed the road.
The evidence put before the court showed that witnesses had seen Teresa on the streets of Napier at a time much later than the original investigation had calculated. Mikas's alibi for the early morning of that day meant nothing if she was abducted at a later hour.
The whole situation stuck in my mind because the child did not look like it should be with this person. He looked at me, I looked at him, and his eyes were, they were just evil eyes.
The testimony of pathologists who examined Teresa's body was chilling.
The death was as a result of asphyxia by manual suffocation. The injuries to the face would be consistent with the application of a hand across the mouth and nostrils.
The stomach contents contained a small pink gelatinous mass, similar to a half-dissolved Jube lolly.
There's a lot of factors about the last 15 years that we've learnt to deal with and cope with. But when you hear the facts of what Teresa endured at that time, it's still, it's really, really hard to listen to that. But when you first go in there, it's kind of, really tense and full on, but you adjust.
ESR scientists took the stand and explained the process by which Mikas's semen had identified him as the murderer.
I prepared these slides in this particular case.
The likelihood of obtaining these DNA profiling results is at least 60 million times greater if the male DNA on the vulval slide originated from Mr. Mikas than if it came from another unrelated male chosen at random from the New Zealand population.
Following Sue Patricevic's testimony, an American DNA expert gave evidence concerning the 3 pubic hairs retrieved from Teresa's body.
As part of the mitochondrial genome, and the hairs that you analysed were identical to that within Mr. Mikas's blood.
That's correct. They matched.
With the final evidence of the pubic hair DNA now before the court, it fell to the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Sergeant Brian Shabb, to complete the prosecution case.
I knocked on the door and the door was answered by the accused, and I now identify him as the man at the back of the court between the 2 prison officers.
This case is about a little girl who went missing, a little girl who was found murdered, and this accused's semen and pubic hairs being found in and on that little girl. It's about the patience of a police force which waited for science to catch up, and catch up it did.
Members of the jury, have you unanimously agreed upon your verdict?
We have.
On the first count, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
On the second count, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
On the third count, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
On the fourth count, do you find the accused guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Is that the verdict of you all? Please proceed.
And to hear that, that's what it was. This is the best words we can hear, except for, hi mum, hi dad, I'm back.
Did my voice reach to you?
You are convicted of the murder of Teresa Maida Cormack. You are also convicted of her rape, unlawful sexual connection, and abduction.
Brian Shabb had finally been able to keep his promise to Teresa.
Yeah, well, I'm pleased. I did what I set out to do. The big team, we all got there really, and for me personally it was great because I made that promise to Teresa on the beach that day, and now I've fulfilled that. So it's a big thing for me.
5,600 days after that rainy Friday in June 1987, police finally saw the man who abducted, raped and murdered Teresa Cormack, sentenced to a life in prison.
till the story's told.
Kind of, she belongs to us again now. She's out of the public. Well, she maybe never will be completely out of the public
But I think we might have
but
said it before. It's now it's to just remember her and the happy things, and be able to put that the horrible
anguish.
Yeah. All that horrible stuff behind us as much as we can.
Truth can't be undone, no matter how you twist the knife. 60 million to one, life for life. And I'm not this way.